My wife announced on our wedding anniversary that I was the worst husband ever after I refused to accept for us to open our marriage. Everyone laughed, including her parents. I was calm and didn't react. The next morning, I took an action that shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. Anniversaries were never just another date on the calendar to me. I believed they were sacred mile markers, proof that, despite the world being a messy, shifting place, two people could hold on to each other through it all. I didn't need grand gestures or viral surprises. I just wanted presence. Commitment. My wife, Mia, used to say the same thing. We'd toast with cheap wine during the early years, scrape together dinner in our cramped kitchen, laugh over burnt chicken and Netflix buffering screens. I believed her then. I really did. Maybe I was foolish to think that just because we started off in sync, we'd stay in rhythm forever. But back then, when I offered my loyalty, I assumed I'd get the same in return. I didn't see the cracks, didn't want to see them, even as they widened right under our feet. This year, our 7th anniversary, I planned something simple and heartfelt. I booked the same small Italian restaurant where we had our second date. I arranged for a violinist to play her favorite piece. She always cried at that part of Cinema Paradiso. I even had a handwritten letter folded in my jacket pocket, the kind I hadn't written since our wedding. I poured so much of myself into that letter, it felt like a second set of vows. I wanted her to know I still believed in us, even when things had been distant. She'd been cold lately, distracted, always laughing a little too much at her phone. I chalked it up to stress, the kind every couple hits eventually. But the truth was knocking. I just didn't answer soon enough. The night didn't start badly. She looked stunning, her red dress hugging the curves I used to trace in the dark like prayer. Her eyes sparkled, though something about the way she kept glancing at the door made me uneasy. Her parents showed up halfway through, which surprised me. She said it was supposed to be just us. But I let it go. I always let things go. I smiled through dinner, raised my glass, gave a toast I barely remember now. I think I said something about loyalty and building a life together. She barely touched her pasta. Just sat there, smiling that strange, tight smile. Then she cleared her throat, leaned forward with both elbows on the table like she was about to deliver a punchline. "I think we should open our marriage," she said, grinning like a woman announcing a vacation. I've been reading and growing, and I think it's time we stop pretending monogamy is realistic. Don't you think?" The restaurant didn't go silent. The clinking of plates and background jazz continued, but in my head, everything froze. I looked at her, then at her parents. Her mother was giggling into her wine glass, like this was some progressive revelation to be celebrated. Her father actually slapped the table and chuckled, about time someone said it out loud. I didn't speak. Not because I was shocked, but because I knew anything I said in that moment would either betray my dignity or my fury. I took a sip of water, nodded slowly, and excused myself to the restroom. I stared into the mirror there for 10 whole minutes. I practiced smiling, practiced anger, practiced indifference. In the end, I went back to the table and said nothing more than, "Shall we go?" She pouted on the drive home, disappointed that I hadn't engaged in the conversation. But I already had all the clarity I needed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting every time she sighed at me from her side of the bed. At some point, she rolled over and muttered, "You're so uptight. No wonder you're boring in bed." That was the last sentence she ever said to me as my wife. By sunrise, my lawyer had everything in motion. Divorce papers, full asset protection, and a very polite but firm eviction notice for her parents, who'd lived in one of my rental homes for 5 years rent-free. I made sure there would be no loopholes, no room for bargaining. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. And when the doorbell rang that morning and she opened it in her robe, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes, I watched from the kitchen as her face went pale. I finished my coffee in silence while she screamed, "Are you serious?" Over that, I just looked at her, finally calm, and said, "You made your choice. I'm just making mine." There's a kind of silence that isn't empty, it's alive. It hums. It tightens around your chest like a belt, squeezes behind your eyes. That's what the morning felt like after she opened the door to the courier and stared down at the divorce papers with disbelief painted across her face. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't even look at her for long. I stood at the kitchen counter, calmly stirring sugar into my coffee as if she hadn't just shattered the life we'd built with a laugh and a drunken declaration in front of her parents. Every word she had said the night before rang through my head like an echo I couldn't turn off. "You're the worst husband ever," she had joked, or maybe not, while her father laughed and her mother grinned. Maybe they thought I'd laugh along too. But something deep in me broke in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, with finality, like a string snapping in the dark. Mia stood frozen in the foyer, gripping the envelope as if it were on fire. "This is a joke, right?" she asked, her voice rising. "You're seriously ending our marriage over a conversation?" I looked at her then, really looked. Her robe hung open slightly, and I could see the delicate necklace I had given her 2 anniversaries ago. She still wore it. Maybe she thought that counted for something, but I had no words left to give her. "It wasn't a conversation," I said flatly. "It was a public humiliation. That's all I offered. No argument, no back and forth, just the truth laid bare." Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to scream, but couldn't find the angle. Eventually, she stormed off upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her like a teenager. By the time she came back down, red-eyed and wild, I had already called an Uber to take her to her friend Naomi's place. I had packed a duffel for her, just enough for a few days. I didn't touch her more personal things. I didn't want to. That house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage that had just seen its final scene. She refused to get in the car at first, pacing the sidewalk and muttering curses under her breath. "You'll regret this," she spat before finally getting in. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. That same morning, my lawyer made sure the eviction notices were served at the bungalow I'd let her parents live in for nearly 5 years. No lease, no rent, just a verbal agreement born from a generous heart. I never made them feel small about it. Never once reminded them that I was doing them a favor. I helped them fix the plumbing when it failed. I paid the property taxes without a word. Her father even borrowed money from me once to cover an overdue hospital bill, and I handed it over without hesitation. And yet, there he was the night before, laughing at me like a circus clown. That laugh burned deeper than any insult Mia had ever thrown. It was proof they never respected me. Not truly. I was just the quiet provider, the man who funded their comfort but didn't deserve their consideration. Later that afternoon, her parents came knocking. I knew they would. I watched from the upstairs window as they stood on the porch, frowning, dressed as if they were coming from church. I could almost hear the rehearsed lines. "Son, let's talk." It was all in good fun. Don't throw away family. I didn't open the door. I didn't owe them that. My lawyer had made it clear. 30 days to vacate. No negotiation. I left an envelope taped to the door, one last gesture of civility. Inside was a letter written in my own hand, not out of anger but closure. I told them I wished them well, but the boundary had to be permanent, that the trust had been cracked beyond repair. People think rage is loud. Mine wasn't. It was quiet, deliberate, calculated, like pouring concrete over roots that had grown too wild to tame. I didn't tell my friends right away. I didn't post anything online. I didn't call my family. I just moved through the motions, reclaiming my space inch by inch. I opened the windows. I washed the sheets. I moved her favorite chair out to the garage. I changed the locks. Every act was a form of healing, no matter how small. The hardest part wasn't her absence. It was realizing how much of myself I had ignored in order to keep the peace. I used to believe that love meant patience, that being the calm one was noble. But what I saw in Mia's eyes that night, what I saw in her parents' laughter, wasn't love. It was entitlement. They thought I'd never walk away, that I needed them more than they needed me, that I'd keep absorbing the little cuts until I bled out quietly in some corner. But I was done playing martyr, done making room for people who wouldn't even give me a seat at my own table. The silence didn't last long, not really. Within 48 hours, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, all variations of the same theme. We heard what happened. "Are you okay? What did Mia do? "You're really divorcing her?" Just like that. Some messages were from old college friends I hadn't spoken to in years, people suddenly energized by gossip and drama. Others came from people I cared about, people who knew the kind of man I was and were quietly cheering for my strength. But most of the calls came from her side of the line. Her cousins, her friends, even her mother's church group, each one more manipulative than the last. She was just trying to be honest. One woman texted me, "You overreacted." Another asked, "Didn't you see this coming? You're kind of emotionally closed off." I read those messages while sipping coffee at the kitchen table, watching the light filter through the blinds. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Mia didn't wait to spin her version of the story. She told anyone who'd listened that I blindsided her, that I filed for divorce because I couldn't handle a real conversation about growth. She painted herself as a woman trying to evolve and me as some cold, traditional stick-in-the-mud clinging to outdated views. According to her, I was controlling, rigid, emotionally unavailable. She never mentioned the part where she humiliated me in public. Never mentioned the part where her parents laughed like I was a punchline. She played the victim, and the world loves a crying woman with a cause. But I wasn't angry. I was prepared. I knew how this game worked. People hear one side and assume it's the truth, especially when it's wrapped in vulnerability and hashtags. Her parents, meanwhile, were livid. They didn't move out quietly. Her father called me at least 5 times, each voicemail more aggressive than the last. "You're seriously putting your own family out on the street?" he barked. "After everything we've done for you?" That part nearly made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me? The mental gymnastics required to flip the narrative that way was impressive. I saved those voicemails. Not for revenge, just as proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. Proof that I had, in fact, been too generous for too long. When I saw them packing their belongings into a U-Haul 3 weeks later, I didn't go out to watch. I stayed inside. But I did glance out the window once, just long enough to see her mother carrying a box labeled kitchen, fragile and shaking her head like I was the villain in a movie. There was no tearful goodbye, no final confrontation. Just cardboard, sweat, and the sound of a gate closing for good. The fallout stretched beyond family. Mutual friends began choosing sides, some more subtly than others. Dinners got canceled. Group chats fell silent. A few bold ones reached out and said, "I always knew something was off with her. You're doing the right thing." But most just drifted into the shadows, avoiding the mess entirely. I didn't chase them. People show you who they are when your life gets hard. I took names, not for vengeance, but for clarity. I had spent too long confusing proximity with loyalty. That was over now. One of the strangest moments came when Naomi, Mia's best friend, called me out of nowhere. "I didn't know she was going to do that to you," she said, voice low, almost guilty. "She planned it. The whole thing. Even told me not to tell you." I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. "She thought you'd cave. She thought it would make you desperate enough to agree to anything just to keep her." That admission sat with me for days. Not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed the quiet suspicion I'd buried, that the woman I married no longer respected me. She wanted leverage, not love. The house felt colder during those weeks. Not empty, just still, like it was waiting to be something else. I started doing small repairs, fixing the squeaky door hinges, repainting the scuffed hallway, replacing bulbs that had been out for months. It was therapeutic in a way. I didn't cry. I didn't get drunk. I didn't even listen to sad music. I just kept moving, like a man sweeping broken glass off his own floor before someone else stepped on it. I got a letter from Mia's lawyer requesting mediation. Apparently, she wanted to revisit the terms of the divorce. I declined. There was nothing left to revisit. We had no children, no shared business, no joint property outside of what I had given her access to. The house was mine before we met. The rental property her parents had lived in? Also mine. The only thing she walked away with was her name, and that was generous. My lawyer reminded me to brace for more smears, more social media subtweets, more flying monkeys trying to guilt me back into submission. But I didn't flinch. I slept well. For the first time in years, I actually slept through the night. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was realizing how much I had twisted myself to keep her happy. How many times I swallowed my voice to keep the peace. I had loved her. Deeply. But love isn't enough when respect is gone. And I finally understood something that had taken me years to grasp. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the absence of people who thrive on creating it. 3 weeks after the eviction was complete, Mia asked to meet. Not through a lawyer. Not through mutual friends. She texted me directly. Just one conversation. I owe you that. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Part of me didn't want to see her again. I had been doing so well, sleeping, eating, rebuilding. The quiet had finally started to feel like peace, not absence. But another part of me needed to see her eyes when I told her it was over for good. No ceremony. No rage. Just truth. I agreed, and we met at a park halfway between our old neighborhood and her temporary place across town. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. She showed up in sunglasses and a jean jacket I had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but energetically. She wasn't the confident woman who'd laughed at me across a restaurant table. Her smile was hesitant. Her hands fidgeted. I kept mine in my jacket pockets, not out of coldness, but to keep myself from reaching for something that wasn't mine anymore. Thanks for coming, she said, like this was some reunion of equals. I nodded, but didn't return the smile. We sat on a wooden bench near the walking trail, the breeze soft but persistent. She crossed her legs and leaned in, elbows on her thighs, trying to close the space between us. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That was her opener. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I messed up. Just disbelief that I followed through. That told me everything I needed to know. You didn't think I'd leave after what you pulled? I asked, voice level. You mocked me, Mia. In front of your parents. In front of strangers. And you expected what, an open marriage proposal in return? She shook her head quickly, too quickly. I didn't mean it like that. It was supposed to be a conversation starter. Something to shake things up. We were stagnant, and I thought maybe. I raised a hand, stopping her. You thought you could shock me into compromising myself. You thought I was so desperate to keep you. I'd let you sleep with other people just to feel like I still mattered. Her mouth opened, then closed. She exhaled through her nose, clearly frustrated. I just wanted us to be honest about what we wanted. No, I said calmly. You wanted what you wanted. And when I didn't go along with it, you tried to shame me. You weaponized my loyalty. You made a joke out of our marriage. That wasn't honesty, Mia. That was cruelty. She blinked hard, then took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were glassy but not yet crying. She wasn't there to apologize. She was there to negotiate. My parents didn't mean anything by it, she offered, shifting tactics. They were just caught off guard and tried to laugh it off. I chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. They lived in my house for 5 years. Rent-free. I never asked for anything. And that night, they didn't just laugh. They joined in. They treated me like a clown at my own anniversary dinner. She tried to reach for my hand, and I pulled back instinctively. That was the moment her face changed. Like she finally realized the door had closed. Not temporarily, not in anger, but for good. So this is it, she asked softly. You're really done. I turned to face her fully. I was never the one who left. You did that the second you decided to treat our marriage like a social experiment. Her jaw tightened. You could have talked to me first. Before the divorce. Before the eviction. You humiliated me, too, you know. I laughed once, short and bitter. Humiliated you? After you announced to a table of people that I was the worst husband ever? After your father laughed in my face? I stayed silent to protect your dignity, Mia. I left with grace because I still respected myself, even when no one else at that table did. For a few moments, we just sat there, breathing. The wind picked up slightly. A group of kids passed by on bikes, laughing, shouting. It felt surreal, how ordinary the world was while mine had been turned upside down just weeks before. She looked away, wiping her eye. You weren't always like this, she said finally. So distant. So cold. I looked down at my hands. No, I wasn't. But years of being taken for granted will freeze any man eventually. You just didn't notice the frost forming. She didn't reply to that. And I didn't press her. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was clarifying. A mutual understanding that we were two very different people now. Maybe we had been from the beginning. I stood up first. She didn't try to stop me. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was just done. As I walked away, I didn't look back. She didn't call after me. No more texts came that night. No missed calls. No drama. Just air. Clean, unburdened air. The first Saturday alone felt strange. Not sad, just unfamiliar. I woke up later than usual, sunlight already warming the bedroom. And for the first time in years, I didn't hear Mia's footsteps padding across the hardwood floor or the soft clatter of her phone sliding off the nightstand. I made coffee without rushing. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I just stood there, mug in hand, watching steam rise like a silent exhale from my chest. The house wasn't echoing. It was breathing again. The walls no longer held tension, no longer felt like they were absorbing our fights or our silence. I walked room to room, noticing how little actually reminded me of her. She had left behind a scarf, some skincare in the bathroom, a few forgotten books on the shelf. But even those felt like things from someone else's life, souvenirs from a trip I didn't want to revisit. I spent that day cleaning. Not the frantic, desperate kind of cleaning people do when they're trying to scrub out pain, but the intentional kind. I sorted through kitchen drawers, boxed up old mail, replaced light bulbs and fixtures I'd ignored for months. I repainted the guest room with soft gray paint, the kind I always wanted but she insisted was too boring. I played music while I worked, old jazz albums, mostly, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to keep the volume down. No one was there to roll their eyes or make passive comments about my taste. The house felt lived in again. And more importantly, it felt like mine. Friends started coming around more often. The real ones, I mean. Darren dropped by with a six-pack and no questions. Just sat with me on the porch while we drank in silence for almost an hour. He finally said, "You did the right thing." I nodded. I know. Others reached out too, people who didn't need a full explanation, who understood the weight of quiet betrayals. No one pressured me to move on. No one tried to distract me with setups or Tinder bios. They let me heal at my own pace, and that was a kind of love I hadn't realized I was missing until it showed up. I found myself journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I didn't write about Mia, not directly. I wrote about boundaries, about silence, about dignity. I wrote about the kind of man I wanted to be, and how easy it was to lose that version of myself when I prioritized someone else's comfort over my own self-respect. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the quiet before the city stirred. I liked walking my neighborhood while the world was still stretching its limbs. One morning, I found a bookstore I'd never noticed before. Tucked between a closed-down bakery and a repair shop, it smelled like cedar and old pages. I ended up talking to the owner, an older woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. She asked if I wanted to join their monthly book club. I said yes, surprising even myself. There were still hard moments. There always are. I'd pass by restaurants we used to love, or see a movie trailer she would have dragged me to, and for a second, grief would prick me in the ribs. But it wasn't for her. It was for the man I had been. So willing, so hopeful, so unaware that the ground beneath him was already crumbling. I mourned him more than I ever mourned the marriage. He had deserved better. I owed it to him to do better moving forward. I started working out again. Nothing intense. Just early morning jogs, some strength training in the garage. I put a punching bag up, one of those small decisions that felt huge at the time. I stopped trying to explain the divorce to people who didn't really care. I stopped accepting half-hearted invitations from mutual friends who still asked, "Have you talked to her?" like I owed them a reconciliation story. I didn't owe anyone anything. I had given enough. More than enough. My therapist said something during one of our sessions that stuck with me. She said, "The fact that you didn't explode, that you didn't retaliate with venom, that's not weakness. That's restraint. That's power." And I felt that truth settle in my bones. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had walked away with clarity and let my silence speak louder than any revenge post ever could. That kind of peace? It's earned. It's fought for. I kept the eviction notice pinned to the inside of my filing cabinet, not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder that I had the strength to draw a line, that I wasn't as passive as I had let people believe, that my silence had always been a choice, not a weakness. One day, I drove by the bungalow where her parents had lived. It had already been rented out to a quiet couple, young, newly married. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just glanced at the porch, remembered the laughter that cut too deep, and let it pass through me like a gust of air. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just steady. The anniversary came around faster than I expected. 1 year to the day since she leaned over that table, glass of wine in hand, and delivered the sentence that unraveled everything. You're the worst husband ever. I remember the stunned silence that followed, the slow dawning laughter from her parents, and how I sat there, still as a stone, feeling the foundation of my marriage crack open like a fault line under my feet. It played in my head like a clip from a movie I didn't remember auditioning for. And yet, as the day approached this time, I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel heartbreak. What I felt, strangely enough, was stillness. A calm kind of acknowledgement. Like revisiting the scene of an old injury and realizing the scar doesn't ache anymore. I spent the morning the way I wanted to, deliberately, with intention. I took a long shower, letting the hot water run over my back until my thoughts quieted. I made breakfast from scratch. Eggs, toast, coffee, the kind of breakfast I never had time for when I was too busy trying to accommodate someone else's schedule. I opened all the windows in the house and let the spring air roll through every room. The light fell across the hardwood floors in a way that felt cinematic, peaceful, earned. That afternoon, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to her. She didn't deserve that anymore, but to myself. I titled it, What I Will No Longer Tolerate. It wasn't a list of grievances or a petty rundown of old wounds. It was a declaration, a boundary carved in ink. I wrote, I will no longer explain my worth to people who only see my silence as weakness. I wrote, I will not let anyone use loyalty as a leash. I wrote, I will choose peace over proximity, respect over romance, dignity over desperation. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like they had been waiting all year to be let out. When I finished, I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of my nightstand. Not for anyone else, just for me. I cooked dinner that night. My favorite meal, something she never liked but I always loved. Roasted lamb, garlic mashed potatoes, asparagus with lemon. I poured myself a glass of red wine and played the same violin piece we'd once danced to, the one from Cinema Paradiso. But this time, I wasn't trying to recreate a memory. I was reclaiming it, taking back a moment that had once meant something and making it mine again. I ate slowly. I chewed every bite with intention. I toasted to no one and everything all at once. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a light sweater, sipping the last of the wine as dusk folded into night. The air smelled like cut grass and spring blossoms. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes tinkled. I let myself drift back, just for a moment, to who I had been a year ago. The man who planned a romantic dinner, who wrote a letter he never got to read, who believed that love alone could weather anything. I felt for him, not with pity, but with pride. Because he didn't break. He didn't burn the world down. He didn't lose himself, even when everything he knew came crashing down around him. She never reached out again. Not after that day in the park. Not after the final paperwork came through. Not after her parents left the house I gave them and pretended it was theirs. And that silence? That was the gift. No backtracking. No begging. Just clean separation. A definitive end to a chapter that had dragged on too long. I didn't check her social media. I didn't ask around. Whatever story she was telling now, it wasn't mine to correct anymore. And I was fine with that. I learned something in all of this, something I wish I had known sooner. Sometimes the loudest form of self-respect isn't a grand speech or a dramatic exit. Sometimes it's simply standing still while everyone expects you to chase. Saying nothing while they write you off. Walking away while they laugh, only to realize too late that you were the one holding everything together. I didn't need to prove anything to her, or to her family, or to the people who took her side without ever asking for mine. The only person I needed to answer to was the man staring back at me in the mirror. And he was proud. As the stars came out that night, I felt a strange kind of joy. Not the ecstatic, cinematic kind. Something softer, quieter. like a coat that finally fit after years of borrowing someone else's. I knew, deep down, that this chapter had closed exactly how it needed to. Not with vengeance, not with cruelty, but with clarity. And in that clarity, I found freedom. If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own boundaries and relationships, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us bring more real, raw, and emotionally grounded stories like this one to life. Stay tuned for more personal narratives that dig deep into family, loyalty, and the strength it takes to choose yourself. See you soon in the next one.